this transformative proposal for education. For example, just let's take one. Dr. Honychurch talked about the curriculum being outmoded. In a way, that is being a little too harsh. I'm usually very harsh, but that is being too harsh on the education system to say about 1890s. It is not to recognize, for example, that whereas all of us were examined by either Cambridge or Oxford GCE, General Certificate of Education, O-levels, for about a generation now, the students are being examined by the CSEC, the CXC, in disciplines and in ways that we had not considered. For example, a school-based assessment. A school-based assessment, which is a form of assessment that begins to create, or is intended to create, a mindset that we did not have created in the paper and pencil test that was done by GCE and so forth. But here's the illustration of it. I mean, I
just want to say that within the budget address, yes, the point was taken that even in the tertiary level, that there are changes that need to be made.
Yeah,
I am not sort of dreaming this up in my head.
I absolutely agree.
And that, yes, the systems in terms of, CXC and CSEC and all of that, but basically the overall pattern,
I agree with you.
Links up, and the innovations that he pointed out, particularly in relation to tourism. The fact that here we are more dependent on the tourism industry, and our training has not really yet met that.
But tourism poses a dual problem. Tourism poses a problem of, one, being a service industry where Dominica, you're a historian, the preeminent historian of Dominica, where Dominica has traditionally been a product base, a primary product base, and agriculture base. So there's a cultural shift that is necessary, irrespective of what kind of education service you have, to transfer that expertise of 400-500 years of producing primary products to producing services. That is one. But there's a second big challenge, which is for the school system to actually form people, in spite of their culture, form people who will serve, and serving in a particular way. That is a second challenge, and it may be more challenging than the general cultural shift. And for example, with that kind of shift to tourism and education, okay, it is very difficult for traditional schools to teach those kinds of products. That is service. Schools were not made for that. Schools were generally made along the industrial model, teaching people how to produce products, hard material products, and generally is not good at that. So I agree with you. Yes, there needs to be that shift. However, we must acknowledge that at the lower level, over which we have control, because we do not have control over much tertiary education, it is still true that a number of our higher education trainees are trained overseas and are trained not only in academic cultures, but are trained in
cultures
that are
okay, gentlemen, I think we
talk about education.
Let's ask Mark. Lennox, let's ask Mark to jump in on that. I think Mark has something to say. Yeah.
Is that in terms of the education system, what we need in Dominica is an education system that is for the times and for the future. For example, there's something I've been speaking about for a while to educators and so on. I'm saying to them that in primary school, children ought to know how to write computer programs. Notice in the budget, within the budget there is money for buying computers so that the testing of students can be done. Nobody can buy computers. But somebody wrote the program. Why is it not a Dominican student or Dominican entrepreneur? Because that's where the whole transformation of society is going. We talk about ICT all the time, But if we are ICT and we're only consumers, we're only on the one end of the bargain. To be producers, and actually, here's where it's interesting. Computer programming or work like computer programming actually requires relatively little capital. What it needs is training.
Skills, yeah.
Skills. So we should, and I will say this again there, maybe in the next budget we might start to do that, start to take a decision that we are to become computer programmers. Because already it's said by all the people who know about this other stuff, by 2030, if you can't write a computer program, you're an illiterate, no matter how much you can write with a pen and pencil. So we ought to be preparing ourselves to introduce and start teaching the programming of computers in our primary schools. We can't do it, well, where we are, we're in July. We can't say next September,
that's
or even September next year.
That's hugely problematic.
We'll start it.
Well, some of that has started.
That's hugely problematic.
It has to be a program, because the first thing, of course, is that you have to get the teachers trained. So you have to set up a program and say, in 5 years' time, we will start, which means that we're going to take the teachers and get them trained so that they can do the teaching. So, you understand what I mean?
But that's hugely, no, I understand, but that is hugely problematic.
Why
because
problematic?
Here, the general complaint has been, and I think, I cannot speak for you, but I think that's what Dr. Honychurch was saying. Here it is, our big complaint is that education has not been aligned enough with our productive capacity of today.
Because but it has to start somewhere. It has to start somewhere.
No, that is completely different. Our productive capacity of today, we are moving into tourism, and the general complaint is that we need an education system that can work with where we are while preparing for the future.
Since you mentioned tourism, here's an important thing. There's a big problem with tourism with collecting statistics. Part of the problem about collecting statistics about occupancy rate is that many persons who are in the tourism business do not have a computer program to run their business. Now, a computer program to run a small 10-room guest house is a kind of thing that a person in Dominica could build and sell as his business. But for him to do that, he has to learn how to do computer programming and database programming. He has to be taught. You understand?
Right, I think some of that has started at the Center of Excellence, the ICT Center of Excellence.
Exactly,
it has started.
Exactly.
But you see,
but it has to go the next step.
Yes.
It has started.
Yes.
But gentlemen, we don't want to make this discussion an education discussion, however. It's a budget we discuss a little bit. And I realize, so we have to move on. We have to move on. We have to move on.
Within the budget, and the transformation of the society,
Prime
Minister made many references about
I am sure it will come up again as we go on. There are other components to it.
So it's very important to decide what are we educating the people.
That is elucidated elsewhere in the budget. We'll come back to it, I am sure. We were speaking of the new mode of governance, really, and we started off on the consultation. The other proposal made in relation to this mode of governance is the establishment of a fiscal policy panel. An objective body away from the government, though appointed by the government, right? That is now going to be the major advisor on fiscal and economic matters, right? To provide advice to the government as to whether its program, its policies are consistent with taking us to the creation of this new society, this modern Dominica that we want to build, right? What's your views on the creation of such a body?
It's a great idea to have such a body, but I think its focus shouldn't be on the fiscal situation of the government, because the fiscal situation of the government is dependent on the economic situation within the country.
Well, if you give the terms of reference, the terms of reference, it
make it
much broader than just
the
that.
problem is when you name it fiscal program.
It's national.
It kind of gives the impression that the people who are appointed there are going to assist the government to manage its budget.
No.
Here's a benefit.
National Fiscal Policy
Here's an
panel.
important benefit,
Yes, yeah.
irrespective of which area it is. In Dominica policy analysis in general, not policy making necessarily, but policy analysis. In other words, that is what the media says about policy, what the academics say about policy, what the opposition parties say about policy. It is usually not science-based.
That's right.
There is not enough rigorous and objective analysis of policy. So, especially critics make claims about policy that are not based in fact. I have just written a paper, for example, to debunk the notion that the Kalinago people have made no move from 1975. And I was debunking a notion in a newspaper which put that in black and white in an editorial. The point is, a panel like this will bring a certain amount of rigor, at least to the analysis of policy, and that will be an improvement in policy making and an improvement in the appreciation and analysis of policy, which we desperately need, so that positions will be clarified. You won't be able to go on the radio or in the newspaper and make a claim that has no basis.
And to continue along that point there, I think we need to put some money aside within the civil service to strengthen the statistics department so that they can collect and disseminate timely statistics for the government's own use and for the use of the business people and the general population. Because without these statistics being available, everybody's left to make decisions by guesswork. You know?
But you see...
Okay, we'll take a break after Lennox. Let's hear you on that one, Lennox.
I'm relating it to what was actually said, you know. The National Fiscal Policy Panel, 3 members, hopefully in action by the 1st of September 2017, to bring together, what the Minister of Finance said was to bring together reports, etc., make recommendations to review projects. So in fact, they are piecing together all of those ideas, whether it is the route of a new highway across the island, or a major investment, or use of funds, or even, you know, international airport or whatever. They would be able to assess these things because of their what was referred to as bringing together the intellectual power, reviewing the projects, and then feeding that discussion into the state, that is the cabinet, and the people who are going to implement those projects. I think this is the main push behind it. So although the term fiscal is used, it is in fact relating those various projects, broadly stated, to the money that they are going to earn, to what they are going to cost, and the effectiveness of those projects for national development.
And if change is needed, what type of change and in what direction. Okay, we'll take a short break here and come back to our viewers and listeners in a short while. Welcome back to all our listeners and viewers. Well, it is clear that the debate has started among our panel, and no doubt it will be carried on with passion to the various publics even before the commencement of the official debate in Parliament. Clearly, the need to transform the society has taken root, as evidenced by the expressions of our panelists so far. We could go on along that line, but we need to make a little shift. Let us spend a few minutes reviewing the economy, the performance of the economy in the last fiscal year. In the budget address, we learned that the economic activity in 2016 expanded, and that preliminary estimates indicate a real growth of 2.8%. Was that surprising to any of you, given that we were coming from, a situation where Erica, destroyed up to 93% of our gross domestic product?
Well, as the Minister of Finance said immediately after stating that, despite the setbacks, and I think that would have been a surprise to people, that have a 2.8% growth despite those many setbacks. And the fact that, as he mentioned later in the address, that the entire economy had to, in a way, be diverted over the last 2 years or so to reconditioning and reviving and rebuilding. And while being able to do that, while at the same time being able to progress and to develop aspects of the economy, this would be remarkable. He mentioned that there will be an expected growth of 3.1% for 2017, 2018. And now people have already on the social media ridiculed this and stated that when he stated that growth elsewhere was 1.1%, and they made comparisons of St. Lucia and St. Kitts and all that kind of stuff. So you can see that already out there on the social media, they are challenging these figures. But if the figures are there, it is indeed quite a remarkable move, considering you have got those two things having to be instituted at the same time. Reconditioning from the damage of 2 years ago, and also repositioning ourselves and taking advantage of economic situation.
Well, I would say, no, I wasn't surprised that there was some growth, precisely because the events of 2015 required rebuilding. The rebuilding itself generates part of the GDP.
That's right.
So, and remember, of course, it's 2% growth over the year before.
That's right.
So if the year before fell and you grew 2.8%, you might still not have been where you were the year before the Erica. It's people have to understand that it's growth relative to where you are.
And then, of course,
and then you grew up. You might still,
of course, you're taking such major things as construction.
Yeah. So all right. One of the major drivers of that would have been the whole effort to reconstruct things, even if they were not reconstructed in a sort of a permanent way. Emergency repairs, all of that would factor into the economic activity. Yes, for sure.
You're so right, Mark, because construction activity actually increased by 31.8%. And the feeder of that construction, mining and quarrying, where we get all our blocks and so on, and sand and so on, it grew by 17.6%.
Yes, because there's a demand for all of this stuff.
You can see demand to rebuild and so on.
So I think part of the discussion that people need to have a little understanding of. One other thing they should teach in school, by the way, is economics. So people can understand these relatively simple things.
Yes.
That the economy works and functions, and people produce goods and services. When a disaster happens, people continue to produce goods and services that have directly to do with the disaster. For example, after 1979, Dominica had its fastest rate of economic growth, largely fueled by construction of homes and houses, repairs to homes and houses and so on, as well as the boom in the banana business, which came along pretty quick. So they sometimes you might say the disaster leads to
the challenges
right.
of those drawbacks really make you activate.
So it's not surprising. It's not surprising.
No, it's not surprising.
It shouldn't surprise.
There was mention made of the challenges in the water services and investment in water, because it's been remarkable what DOASCO has been doing around the island in the last few years. There's setback with Erica, and yet now we see all over the place the reinvestment
restoration of water supplies. Just an interesting statistic that's in the budget address in relation to tourism, that although there was an increase in stayover arrivals, output in the hotel and restaurant sector actually declined by 12.8%, right? Yep. And it is felt that I mark you in the business, you know, what would you say are the factors due to this?
They put forward a reason there. People stayed shorter periods of time. But the second reason, of course, could be that the number of persons who stayed in private homes might have increased, because that's by far the largest group of tourists we have. So if you know, and one of the biggest expenditures which a tourist makes is for a place to stay. But if he stays, if your cousin comes to see you, stays at your home, he's still a tourist, but he doesn't pay for housing. So,
but there is another aspect which I am noticing, is that because of the technology and the availability through Airbnb, it really is perhaps a statistical problem.
That's right.
So that the indicators are far more difficult for the statistic department to capture when they're judging it through established hotels and stuff, where people are having rooms and cottages and things all over the island, and they're doing this independently. The money is going into their account through credit cards and stuff. So that there is it again, there is an expansion that's taking place, but it isn't recorded.
That's right. And there's a suspicion in agriculture that the same thing is happening. That's happening.
So collection of data is to reflect the reality is something that is important. And that also, and we just talked about the Department of Statistics, the CSO, that also will help to bring much more credibility to policy discussions. Achievements, for example, Dr. Honychurch mentioned, people are questioning certain things. That would help to make it much more defensible, much more trustworthy, which we need.
Yeah. Let's take a quick look at the fiscal situation. In 2016-17, current revenue was 882.4 million. Which include the receipts of the Citizenship by Investment Program, under which $507 million was collected. 334 of that was used to finance the budget. What's your views on that kind of performance?
Well, again, I mean, when you're talking about innovation, this whole CBI, say what you want of it, and when you see the figures that are coming in through it, this is significant indeed. And the way in which, and remember, the financial secretary made an excellent speech back in April where she talked about the careful management of this money, setting it up. And also, what has come out of this budget is a rather innovative thing that I've been thinking of some time, that if you make those citizens tax residents, and we'll discuss that later, and then they would be paying income tax at our rate, which would be favorable to them because it would be less than what they would have to pay wherever they are. We are in fact benefiting from that as well. So it's stunning when you actually see the figures, and this is what budget addresses are always useful for, to be able to categorize where the money is coming from, and then of course how it is being used, public services, debt servicing, due diligence. I was interested to see that is it 9 or 19 million was being spent, which shows that the investigation of citizens people who are receiving these is going on and it's used and rigorously.
We can talk about the spending. We can talk about the spending of that money, but I think it is necessary to spend a second to emphasize the achievement, the collection, the making of that money. This is unprecedented revenue. This is unprecedented in Dominica. And just the achievement by the Ministry of Finance, the Minister for Finance leading that ministry, just that achievement, I think, is worth paying some attention to. He definitely has to get high marks for bringing in that kind of revenue to Dominica. Also, so how it's going to be used to develop the country is also an important matter. But I want us not to gloss over it as if it were something that other people have done in the past. It hasn't been done in the past. It is very important, but also during the past few months, the country has had to debate how this revenue is to be protected, how it is to be discussed, and I hope by now the country is beginning to form a consensus to say that this money is so important that irrespective of what we politically think of that way of making money, that it is important in itself, and there are ways we should behave in relation to it. For example, the destination, the country, is really the product there. That people are becoming citizens of Dominica. And as such, to denigrate the country, to destroy the country's good name in itself is an act of economic destruction that we should not tolerate. And I believe unless we accept and spend a second to acknowledge that the Minister for Finance has done tremendous work and done it tremendously well in bringing that kind of revenue to this country at a time where other forms of revenue are not as forthcoming, I think we would be missing something.
I wanted to make an intervention there. I don't know if Lennox remembers, but 30 years ago, we won a program on DBS. And if you remember that.
Yes, yes.
And we were talking about basically the economic viability of Dominica as a political entity and so on. And I think I had made the statement that we must find some means of getting money into Dominica beyond the traditional aid which is given on we know how it's given. And this particular idea, I didn't have it in mind, but I have another ideas in mind that costs us relatively little, but is worth a lot to the person who wants it, the service. And by one means or the other, we've hit upon this particular modus operandi of getting, because quite frankly, the population of Dominica, its productive capacity, etc., is simply not sufficient to give us the minimum amount of services that the government must deliver. And we need, it's not a question of we want, it's a question of we need some such program. It happens to be this CBI program, which we know is a fragile thing for sure, but we know that while it's there, we must do everything, as Dr. Aaron says there, to protect it and keep the funds flowing in.
Because I sometimes regard it in the same way as the 1970s, 80s boom in oil in Trinidad, and the way in which they misspent the money, and when it was over, they were struggling. And I think that CBI, well, I mean, hopefully you will have a continuation of clients, but we have to look at it like that. It's interesting to see, I was reviewing some fourth Global Biennial Conference on Small Island States held in the Seychelles, where they were essentially saying the Caribbean faces mounting challenges according to the report, and unless there's a seismic shift in policy making, the outlook is stark. Sluggish growth, spiraling debt, rising crime rates, piecemeal investment, and low productivity all pose serious threats to the region's future. Yes, if you're looking in completely traditional methods. And that's why you have to find something innovative. Then if we turn to the Commonwealth Deputy Secretary General, Dedot Maharaj, and he says, the future of the Caribbean will not be based on commodities. We're too small to mass produce and compete with larger countries in Africa and Asia, and indeed in Latin America. The future of the Caribbean, I think, will lie in us becoming knowledge economies, focusing on the digital economy, and tapping into new areas of growth. Well, this is a new area of growth, and we have, in effect, led the way.
There is another area of growth which we can tap into. It happened to come to Dominica by accident. That is the provision of offshore education. Within the budget, it says that education is one of those areas that grew, and they've specifically said private. It's private education.
But there is Dr. Honychurch said new, but I want to emphasize that this means has been there from the end of the last term of Prime Minister Mary Eugenia Charles.
Well, actually, it was May 1991.
May 1991. It commenced in May 1991, and the emphasis I want to make here is not only we say new, but what is success? The format is new. The level of success is new. Again, it is very easy.
Attention given to it by the Prime Minister himself.
And it is very easy.
Put his own brand on it.
It is very easy to, especially for young people, to not be aware that this form, this economic citizenship program, has been around.
Its roots.
Not been as successful because it was in a different format. So leadership and innovation, the very same things we're talking about as means of transforming the economy, have been applied in the policy area, in the leadership area, to make that thing which just used to bring in,
in fact,
a little money.
By every political party.
Every political
Remember
party.
the re-engineered economic citizenship program. So every political party has had a go at it,
yes,
and an attempt to re-engineer it and shift it and adapt it. And this is one which seems to be bearing amazing fruit.
And this is the most successful.
Yeah.
This by far. And we, again, those things...
Which is good for Dominica because, as a country and as a people, we must learn from experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's very good for Dominica. And we have to emphasize that. There is, in this country, generally, the tendency that by the time we recognize something that is good, it is no longer there.
No longer there.
And so we have to ensure that we are aware that, that this is, the success is new, the format is new.
Okay, gentlemen, under the fiscal situation, there's also some very interesting information, which speaks to how government has managed debt and how we have managed to raise money on the regional securities system, right? We are told, for example, that the total disbursed outstanding debt as of June 2015, debt to GDP ratio, is estimated at only 61.4%, right? And that central government, the debt to GDP is 51%.
And the point was made also that debt in 2000 was 148%.
So it's more than half.
So you can see where we've come.
It's been cut.
It's been cut by
more than half.
Yes.
And that is a tremendous achievement.
Yes, yes.
And what it allows us to do, what it allows the country to
borrow,
is to not only borrow, yes, but also to have much more money available, at least available, because less money is going into servicing at least as a proportion
right.
of the dollar you get, less money is going into servicing of debt, and therefore more money is available for productive and other purposes, which is something that previous governments did not have. Especially in the 95-2000 period, immediately before the crash of the fiscal situation, the government was seriously hamstrung by the fact that so much money was being used for debt servicing, very little was available for investment, for growth, and for development.
And of course, the popularity, the subscription to government bonds, that was pointed out as well. And the fact oversubscribed, and
interest rate as low as 1.9%.
And also that this would indicate the private sector respect for government, that there's they feel a sense of security and confidence in
part of the
participating
reason why they think it's oversubscribed is that in the commercial banks that are flooded with money, they have nothing else to do with the money. So therefore they invested in
but then the commercial banks,
because
pointed,
the private sector isn't borrowing.
Yeah.
So the commercial banks have all this money, they need to put it somewhere. And that comes out of only out of our own region,
so
but out of
the commercial banks that are buying these bonds back?
A lot of it.
Where the information coming from?
Well, they are the ones who traditionally buy.
No, I ask you where the information on this is coming from. Again, absence of statistics. You made a strong case for reliable statistics.
We should have reliable statistics. but I'm just saying what they say. The United States and Europe have pumped up the money supply in the world tremendously. One of the results of which is that it has driven down interest rates to zero. And that has filtered back even into our system here, where you have negative interest rates on your savings, where the government bank is charging you money if you want to keep a savings account. So the banks don't, it's just indicative that the banks have so much money, they don't want your money.
And yet he pointed out, the Minister of Finance.
So the money, because the money they have, the bank has the money, and they're paying interest on it, and they're not lending it out to anybody. It reduces their profitability.
But in spite of the fact that it appears that all this money is flooding around, a very important statement and policy was unveiled today, recognizing the growing middle class of trained young people who need and have a need to own their own home. And this innovative social security scheme for housing, also targeting Dominicans living abroad, and would be coming on stream within this financial year, so that young professionals who are having a difficulty, and this you may need to explain, why you have these young professionals who, renting houses still, having difficulty to get money from, would it be the banks, to be able to build their own homes. And then the government is initiating this scheme here with the Social Security to develop.
Well, here's an interesting thing there. It's a statement that's made, but I'm not sure there is statistics to support it, because the fact that well, these young professionals, I don't know how many of them are, there really are.
Remember, this is coming from consultations.
Who are having difficulty.
All these policies come from consultations.
Who are having difficulty accessing loans. But the important point I wanted to make about this there is that I'm personally not in favor of the segregation of the population by income. I admit that's such a statement. I used to work at the planning department in 1977, and the other people there thought I was a crazy man. But the important point is, when you segregate people by income, you create a us and them kind of society. There's less cohesion, which tends to lead towards more crime and this sort of thing there. If the rich and the poor and the whatever are living next together. We know each other. We build up mutual obligations.
Well, I think this is not necessarily physically dividing people up. This is giving access to funds to be able to invest in housing wherever it is.
No.
But there's another aspect of that money.
That's the way it has been done. For example, in 1977, I made the statement they were planning Bath Estates for low-income workers and EMS all for middle-income workers. That's how the situation has been done.
But there's another aspect. So you mentioned that the banks are awash in cash.
Yeah.
Right? I think here is where the entrepreneurship aspect of the Minister for Finance's budget is important. I have been advised that banks may be so awash in cash, but does not reflect the fact that there is nothing to do with it, but reflects rather how creative the creative class is in finding profitable things to do with the money. And that is exactly the definition of entrepreneurship. And so the provisions and the focus in the budget on entrepreneurship, I understand to be a direct attempt to create a group of people who are creative, who are effective, who are knowledgeable, who are skilled in finding things to do in productive area. That is what entrepreneurship is, especially regarding new ways of doing things, doing new things, and that would put a draw on the funds that are available. In other words, the way my late brother, a banker, used to put it to me was, there are less good ideas about how to spend the money than there is money. There's more money than people know what to do with it. And so the entrepreneurship aspect is to create more people who can create better ideas about what to do with the money that there is. And that is something that is really necessary, and the Minister for Finance is on point.
Which presents an interesting problem there, in that because of Dominica's population structure, the group of persons who would usually you would expect to coming up with new ideas actually a shrinking group, and it's.
And who's that group? The young?
The young people between 20 and 40. That's a shrinking group. It's the group, might say 50 plus, that's getting to be bigger and bigger, who are risk averse. They don't want that this 50-year-old to go and start up a new business and so on. So there's a lot of things that need to be.
Well, I think that was addressed
together
in here, in the budget. This encouragement of small business, of innovative entrepreneurship and that kind of thing, that was covered within the budget, in this recognition that the fact that so many people with tertiary education were leaving the island, were going away, and that some of these programs that are being put in place was to try to encourage them here in innovative ways that not necessarily are traditional, So, I mean, at the very beginning.
Well, as Dr. Aaron was trying to indicate there, most of the time, the problem about doing things isn't a lack of money, it's a lack of ideas.
Yeah.
Yes. So everybody wants to open a snacket. Then we have 10 snackets and nobody has any customers.
Well, that is why there's emphasis here in agro-processing, in innovative ways and small businesses, that if you employ 3 persons, a minimum of 3 persons, you get incentives and stuff like this. So I think that is because, he opens up the talk in the first few pages. He says people must be highly skilled. It must be the hallmark of the new Dominica. The skills of tomorrow are not those of the past, and not yet included in the education system.
Gentlemen, we need to move on. Time is not on our side. We are still in the mood of, in the frame of building this modern, prosperous Dominica. And let's take a look at some of the critical policy decisions and activities, right, that hopefully is putting us on the road to creating that new Dominica. Right? And let us just revisit the construction of Kempinski, 160 rooms, Jungle Bay, Walcotlet, right? Marriott, right? Information we have is that, those investments under the CBI is going to result in, you know, as much as over 360 marketable rooms in Dominica. If we're speaking of 1.5 scale hotels, you know, you're speaking of about 1.5 employees per room, right? That takes the potential short to medium term employment in those investments, coming from those investments alone, to over 560, right? And that is where the training and the new skills are. We had the conversation already in relation to the jobs, the skills that are required to service a 5-star growing hotel sector, right? What's your take on those investments and their potential and the backward linkages in the economy, the agricultural sector, etc., and so on? Right? Over 550 jobs on these only.
Well, that is one way, and a major way, of converting CBI, which critics consider to be not sustainable. That is a major way of converting it into a sustainable investment, which means that irrespective, we acknowledge the fragility. We acknowledge that CBI is fragile by its nature.
Right.
But here is the Minister for Finance, the government of Dominica, finding ways to spend the money and the entire mechanism of CBI to create lasting things, sustainable, lasting. And these are 3 lasting investments with huge impacts, not only on labor, not only on the people who build it or build them or will work there, but the people who will become providers, sellers, sellers of goods, of fruits, of fish, as well as sellers of services, tour sellers, tour operators, and so forth. And that is a very important aspect of CBI that has not been acknowledged by the critics, that in itself, it may be fragile. In itself, it may not be sustainable. That is debatable. But the uses to which it is being put are clearly, classically sustainable and high impact uses that should be, you know, congratulated.
Yes, my concern is the size of the entire units and the fact that you have to carefully coordinate the linkages that you mentioned to be in place to make those things activate. So yes, you can install all the concrete and all the landscaping and everything, but then one, how do you get the people there? What is the regular turnover? What percentage of occupancy are you going to be enabled? Dominica traditionally has had scattered 10, 15, at most 20-room hotels scattered around the island where the fishermen, the farmers, and so that you talk about can feed in. When you get past a certain volume, you're going to be ordering those containers from Miami to supply all the juice and the lamb and whatever else.
Unless there's careful coordination.
That's what the point is.
Which is the aspect of governance, all right? Which is the aspect of governance that was being mentioned earlier. And you said consultation, yes, and consultation with the people, especially to give them as much advance notice. That has happened. To the minister, the Prime Minister has gone out for years now, forewarning that these businesses are coming and urging providers and would-be providers, young people, people who are already in business, to get ready, to get up to standard in order to provide those services. And not only has he called on them using the bully pulpit, but he, as Minister for Finance, has also created policies, for example, the various packages of millions available to farmers, to fishermen, and to hoteliers and other providers in order to be able to do that. No, I am not underestimating the complexity of coordinating.
I'm not decrying it. I'm just saying
I know.
There has to be a very skillful linkage between all these things that you talked about.
And it is a complex thing. It is very complex. It requires coordination, and I believe you have drawn attention to a potential pitfall is the question of volume. Yes, we can actually coordinate and get ready for it, but We need to get ready fast.
But then in any case...
I would just make an intervention here on the tourism thing here. I was at a meeting, well, a couple of months ago. A couple of months ago. We had two people who were making presentations on the tourism business. One of whom was talking about the number of rooms that are coming on stream, and the other person is talking about the expected growth of arrivals up to 2022. And unfortunately, the growth of arrivals was much slower than the expected increase in rooms, which is a little problematic. That's one. Second thing is, the tourism master plan says that for us to get into what they call the medium growth strategy or stage would require that we have 7,000 immigrants, which means that we need to have an immigration program if we are going to have these hotels function as we would like them to. So we unless, as Lennox was trying to say, that we coordinate all of these things carefully, we might not get the target that we are aiming at.
And somehow I feel feeling seep into the conversation now that all these things is the responsibility of the state. We have the Kempinski that have their target groups, they have their marketing arrangements, they have their clientele, right? And they too will be making a contribution to bringing in people.
Yes.
Right? So we seem to be trapped in a situation where we keep focusing on the state to get all these things done, rather than the state be the enabler as we indicated in the budget.
The state,
but gentlemen, we have about 12 minutes left, and we have a lot of ground to cover. Let us put a stop on this for a while. Let us get some other critical areas that we want us to touch on. I mean, we cannot do justice to the entire budget address. I come to realize this, right? There's good news for BICO policy.
That's right.
That from December.
CLICO.
Oh, that's great. Get my money.
Right? Get the money.
I'm amazed at the numbers, 380 something Dominicans involved. Yeah?
But let us touch quickly. Let us touch quickly on the measures.
Yes.
The measures. I think, which I think are,
particularly the headline measure.
There's normally a soundbite in budget addresses that people like to hear. No new taxes. Right. We didn't hear this one, but
we heard something. I think we heard something that is equally satisfying with that, which is we're not going to penalize. We're not going to penalize, labor or work or hard work, and that is exactly what the provisions under that.
That's correct.
So in other words, essentially, many people are getting a tax refund.
Yeah. You get a tax.
That's right.
But I think the incentivizing.
But for those people who didn't listen to the budget, please clarify the 30,000 figure threshold, so that if you earn below 30,000, you do not pay no more tax. However, of course, we fully understand we are all continuing to pay VAT, which in fact some economists say is a far fairer way of collecting funds.
No,
it is not
all
necessarily,
says
but still.
It's less fair than income tax.
But that idea of not penalizing effort is very important for building a culture of entrepreneurship, for building a culture of work, and that is very much to be emphasized.
Except that because it's just on income, doesn't matter what your income is, it doesn't necessarily make you more entrepreneurial. If it was done in such a way to say, if your income is made from operating a business, you got up to 30%.
I remember teaching in 3 places at the same time in 1992. And I remember that at a certain point, the amount of tax that was taken on my overtime was so much that I decided it was not good for my health. So there is absolutely some incentive in backing off the money and letting it go into my pocket, for sure.
Okay, the other one, gentlemen, is $15 million to the manufacturing sector.
$15 million.
$15 million, yes. We lent at 3%. With a grace period, right? Up to 12 months, except for in the case of working capital, where you're just 3 months from working capital.
Here is something that is not emphasized enough. Manufacturing pays the highest salaries
Usually.
in the economy. And that has been the case in Dominica. Manufacturing salaries are higher on average than in other areas. And that is one that is statistical, that's documented in the Dominican case.
Who are these workers? Where are they located?
Generally, it is because generally the manufacturing employee has a higher skill level than in other areas of the economy.
But do you know what is one of Dominica's biggest manufacturing enterprise, which is actually captured in statistics, but people don't forget it? Making bread. It's actually a manufacturing activity, and there are lots of people employed.
You want to touch quickly on some of those major projects? We have the international airport, we have the work and also
we have 10 minutes left,
okay,
so we have to make the most of it by just doing. That's exactly what I had in mind.
Yes.
Touching on the major projects.
The new national hospital, the hospital for Marigot,
right.
All of these developments.
And the much talked about over the years international airport, for which government has definitely moved, and there is a consultant company who will be presenting next month, the second presentation to government with respect to more detailed studies on the site and the designs, and government has already pledged, committed $10 million US to
Airport Development
Fund, with a commitment for $5 million from the month, all from the citizenship.
So 60
although I would say two things. Probably the person beside my brother and my sister who know all the land that the airports have been proposed to be built at best. That's one thing. But secondly, I am not too particularly excited that the international airport will transform economic situation in Dominica.
Well, the thing is, if you're running a democracy, the majority of people who want this and you want to provide it. I must say at this point, however, one must congratulate those persons who have been responsible for rehabilitating Douglas Charles. The quality of the work there, Mr. Bardwell and the others who have been the contractors, is remarkable, and we must understand this thing takes time. You need that airport to be fully serviceable, that's Douglas Charles, while you proceed on this other entity. And yes, indeed, I mean, St. Vincent is already showing it after spending almost 1 billion EC. You go there and there's still just little Liat and SVG. One of these days, a few more planes, scheduled flights will come in, but it is a challenge. It is a challenge, but it is something that in the national psyche people see as a development.
But more than the psyche also, you don't play it, right?
No.
But can you do without an airport? Can you do without an international airport?
Well, we have an international airport.
No, I know that. I mean, but in a real sense. In a real sense.
No,
we're talking about
we should speak with more precision. An airport that can accommodate a jet plane with 300 persons aboard. That's something of the sort. Okay. Interestingly, the last site that's chosen, which is essentially what they call the Crompton Point Airport, is not that expensive to build, because I know the area perfectly well. It's up on a ridge that's relatively flat. There's a bit of a slope as you go up.
But this one is not Crompton Point.
It's going up towards, it would cross the runway that Edison James intended to build up when he goes up through Joe, up the area there, right?
Well, this airport, actually, I don't want to let cats out of the bag, but I kind of live halfway on it. Right. Is essentially interesting enough, and I have the whole airport history from 1943 when the first plane landed, but it is going back to a proposal from the Eugenia Charles days when the Alexander Gibb engineers recommended Woodford Hill. But then Ms. Charles was concerned about the area of, that's right, the alignment and the effect of Laue in Woodford Hill and the gap between Small Farm and Woodford Hill. And she said to Alexander Gibb, design something else. within that same area. And they did something else, but the problem is it would be affected by crosswinds. UWP came and they chose some other route. This route essentially is from Woodford Hill, cutting across through Mr. Garnet Didier's Geest manager's house, coming out at the Eden Road Wesley, aligning with the trade winds, but also avoiding, and this is the important challenge for all of those airports, avoiding monojab as an approach. We will see it unveiled, we'll hear more about it, but it is very interesting that the UNDP report, which is also coming out, identifies that zone. There's preliminary work, there are preliminary plans, the soil tests have been carried out, but certainly this is the way it appears to be going. There are other aspects, of course, that will be linked into it, is the land that will be taken, appropriated from people. All is not lost in relation to the land that was purchased behind Wesley, because these people will be compensated with the land that was bought for the other airport, and they will also receive monetary compensation for their houses and stuff like that. There's a big program there. And then, of course, roadways and all of these things come into place to be able to make a bypass to Wesley, Portsmouth, etc. A bypass that I am very glad I have heard about in this budget is the one to Cabritz, bypassing Lago.
That's right,
because you cannot have these big hotels and stuff there and have to pass through the bottleneck of Lago. Well, no, I'm not deprecating Lago at all. I'm just basically saying that these...
No parochial squabbles, no parochial squabbles.
These are other very innovative projects that I'm looking forward to. We've got the renovation of the West Coast Road.
And let us talk on the indoor sports facility, which will
up at Stock Farm.
The indoor,
the
indoor sports facility, multi-sports facility at Stock Farm. Right, which a presentation was made to the Cabinet up to this afternoon on that facility to hold events such as basketball, netball, volleyball, swimming, and so on.
It brings balance. It brings balance that a number of groups, a number of demographics have been talking about.
Especially some young people.
Especially young people, but it so it's not just the normal hotel and other structures. Here we have structures for culture, structures for sports, a number of open to a number of wide segment of the Dominican population, and I believe it will make quality of life much better.
Gentlemen, we have reached a point where we literally have to make closing statements, and what I would be happy in your closing statements. If in your closing statements you could touch on things like agriculture, which we haven't touched on. So each of you have about 2 minutes to make your closing statements, and we'll just start with Dr. Honychurch and come down the road.
Yes, agriculture remains a mainstay of Dominica's economy. We talked a little earlier about the problems and challenges with the markets. The Prime Minister mentioned the exports of root crops as far as the United Kingdom, for instance, which should be encouraged. The fact that we will be getting back on board with some limited exports of bananas to the United Kingdom. All of these are based on a whole set of programs that have been put in place over the last couple of years, particularly the fighting of disease and black sigatoka, etc. There's innovative aspects also in relation to agro-processing, the encouragement of that aspect, that you have this value added before even leaving Dominica. In fact, as you go through the budget, you see there are a lot of key areas related to entrepreneurship and employment in relation to agriculture, which does not necessarily be the agriculture in the field. There's an aspect of that as well. So yes, agriculture attention has been paid here, and of course we have the manufacturing, the DCP resurrection going on here, important for our coconut industry. There are developments taking place in cocoa. We have had some setbacks in coffee, but certainly they're working ahead in attempting to rectify that. So in agriculture, although we haven't gone into detail, I think that that has aspects of it within the budget that we can look forward to.
Okay, Ron? Well, young people, skilled people, educated people, middle class people, the entire country should be excited by this budget because the provisions are to modernize, to bring up to date all the areas of activities from agriculture, which is most traditional to us, by making it smarter, by making it much more scientific, as well as coming to the newest things that we are doing, services through tourism. It is a proposal to upgrade the entire economy, to modernize it, and in order to make all of us more productive, to make all the sectors much more viable, much more productive, and to take us closer to the middle class life that we want, that all of us aspire to. And that is quite a thing for a government of Dominica to really make possible. We've talked about it before. Here now, the government has, one, the material means in terms of money to do it, but also has the policy and the philosophical wherewithal to bring along various sectors to get this done as a collective. That is good stuff for Dominica.
Yeah, well, my view on the budget there was that I was pleased that we had a budget which didn't depend on the beneficence of benefactors, that we had our money and we could make decisions as to what we will do with it. And what I would really like to say is that hopefully we can have many more budgets like that where we have sufficient money to take the decisions that we think are good for us. You know, so if we want to build an airport, we have the money to build it. If we want to build a factory, we can do it. And importantly, agriculture can now really be subsidized, because when Dominica was an agricultural country, the question of subsidizing agriculture was a nonsensical statement because it couldn't subsidize itself. So now that we have money, we are able indeed to subsidize agriculture so that among other things, the standard of living of the people who actually engage in farming can be raised. You know, because I've been speaking about sometimes that I think the target income we should have for a farmer should be about $60,000 per year after his expenses are made. And I think now the government is in a position to assist him to do that. And his workers, of course, should not be having miserable wages. He should have comfortable wages that he can, you know, spend and have his TV and his jacket and tie like me as well, even if he's an agricultural worker.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you. I mean, a few years ago, the Labour Party created in the minds of Dominicans the vision of a prosperous, peaceful, and just Dominica. Erica came and sort of, you know, blurred that image a bit. We see evidence in this budget address of our recovery at the economic front. We see a commitment to transforming the society, some of our institutions, our governance processes, and throwing out the challenge really to the people, putting the development of the country and the creation of that new society in the hands of the people by putting more resources into their hands, resources of all kinds, not just financial, but opportunities to acquire the skills this 21st century requires to put Dominica in the position. And I am sure that, you know, people will respond to it, and that the government will get the full support of the population in pursuing this agenda. So I want to thank you for your contributions and wish you a pleasant night and drive back home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, that was a lot to cover in a short time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.